Have you ever just, stared at your to-do list and felt completely swamped? That feeling.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Or maybe you're running a business looking at everything you offer and just wondering, how do we even manage all this?
Exactly. It's that feeling of being constantly busy, like you're always running, but you have this little voice asking, am I actually getting anywhere? Making real progress.
We all know it, whether it's like that personal mountain of tasks or a company trying to do everything.
Right. And in today's world, with so much coming at us, figuring out what's actually important, well, it's not just nice to know, it's pretty much essential. Okay, so let's unpack this a bit. In this deep dive, we're going to explore something that sounds simple, but it's actually incredibly powerful, the 80-20 principle.
That's right.
And our mission today really is to help you cut through all that noise, identify what's genuinely essential, whether it's at work or just in life. And then the crucial part, learn how to put your energy, your time, where it's going to have the biggest impact.
Yeah, and this isn't just some abstract theory, right? We're talking practical stuff, things you can actually do.
Exactly. Practical ways to boost your efficiency, your success, maybe even your happiness, surprisingly enough. We really want to make this simple, maybe even a bit entertaining and super easy for you to start using.
Yeah, absolutely. Because at its heart, the 80-20 principle gives you this lens, I guess, to see this imbalance that's kind of everywhere, the gap between effort and reward.
Yeah.
It's really about achieving more, but with often significantly less input. Not by doing more things, but by doing less of the stuff that doesn't really move the needle. It's a big shift in thinking. It helps you see where your efforts truly matter and then, focus everything there. Leverage that disproportionate impact.
Do less, achieve more. It almost sounds, too good to be true, doesn't it? A bit counterintuitive.
It really does.
But that's exactly what we're going to dig into today. The surprising truth behind this idea that could unlock so much potential for you. So let's start right at the beginning. What is this 80-20 principle? Fundamentally, it says like it's all about seeing the world as, fundamentally imbalanced.
Exactly. That's the core idea. It basically says that roughly 80% of your results, your output, what you want to achieve, come from just about 20% of your work, your input.
Okay, 80-20.
But, and this is important, let's be clear right away, 80-20 is, it's a shorthand, a heuristic. It's not like some fixed mathematical law.
Right, not set in stone.
No. The numbers don't always add up neatly to 100, and the ratio isn't always precisely 80-20. Sometimes you might find it's more like 70-30, or maybe 90-10. Sometimes it can be really extreme, like 99.9 to 0.01.
Wow.
The real power isn't in the exact numbers, it's in recognizing this deep, pervasive imbalance. That's the key takeaway. Most results are driven by just a few key inputs.
That's a crucial distinction. So it's more like a pattern detector, a way to look at things, not a strict formula.
Exactly, a guiding insight. And once you start looking for this pattern, you honestly start seeing it everywhere, like in your own life all the time.
Okay, like what? Give me an example.
Well, think about that really common experience, right? You've got a big deadline coming up, maybe a report, a presentation, something major.
The pressure's on.
Great. You might have had weeks, maybe even months to get it done. But where does most of the really critical work happen?
Usually in the last couple of days, right? That final frantic push.
Exactly. You probably achieve more, the really important stuff, in those few super focused days right before the deadline than you did in all the weeks leading up to it.
Yeah, that's painfully true.
That's the 80-20 principle right there, playing out in your own work habits. It shows how that focused effort can be just exponentially more productive than kind of spreading it out.
It's almost like the pressure strips away all the non-essential stuff, doesn't it? Forces you to focus.
It absolutely does. And we see this pattern just as clearly, maybe even more dramatically, in the business world. Loads of businesses, when they actually sit down and analyze things, they discover that only about 20% of their products.
Just 20%?
Yeah, out of maybe hundreds or thousands of items they sell, that small chunk actually brings in something like 80% of their total profits.
Wow. Imagine finding that out, that only a handful of things are really paying the bills.
It totally changes the game strategy-wise.
And it's not just business products, right? You see this imbalance in other weird places, too.
Oh, definitely. It pops up in some surprising areas. Like, there are statistics that suggest, broadly speaking, that around 20% of drivers might be involved in about 80% of traffic accidents.
So a small group has a massive impact on the overall accident rate.
Exactly. It highlights how a small minority can have this hugely disproportionate effect, a negative one in this case. Most people drive pretty carefully, but a small fraction contributes to the vast majority of incidents. It just shows not all inputs have equal weight. Yeah.
That makes sense.
And sometimes, like I mentioned, that imbalance is even more stark than 80-20. There was this fascinating study back in 1997 looking at the movie industry.
Yeah.
Researchers analyzed about 300 movies released around that time. And guess what? Out of all 300 films, just 4 of them.
Only 4 out of 300.
Yep, just 4 movies. That's like 1.3% of the total. They generated 80% of all the ticket sales for that period.
That's insane.
Yeah.
1.3% brought in 80% of the money.
Crazy, right? Almost all the revenue, the entire industry's financial success, driven by just a tiny handful of blockbusters. The other 296 movies, they barely made a dent comparatively. It really shows how concentrated success can be.
Yeah.
The disproportion can be absolutely massive.
So, okay, if 80% of the results roughly come from 20% of the effort, what's happening with the other 80% of the effort we put in? Is it just pointless? Wasted?
Well, wasted might be a strong word sometimes, but it does mean that not every action, not every cause has the same level of impact, not even close. The whole principle stems from this observation. You can pretty much always divide causes into 2 groups. There's a minority, the vital few, that have a huge disproportionate impact on the result. And then there's the majority, the trivial many that are present. They take up time and energy, but their actual impact on the outcome is pretty small.
So it's this fundamental inequality between cause and effect.
Exactly. That inherent difference in leverage, that's what leads to this 80-20 split, or whatever the ratio turns out to be. It's a basic insight into how things often work. Effort and reward are rarely, if ever, a simple one-to-one deal.
Okay, here's where it gets, I think, really interesting and maybe a bit tricky for how we usually think. If this imbalance thing is so universal, like if it's happening all around us, dictating so many outcomes, why do we fight it? Why does it feel so wrong or counterintuitive? Why do we always seem to expect things to be balanced and fair?
That's such a crucial question. It really gets to a deep human tendency, doesn't it? We tend to operate with this built-in assumption that the world should be balanced, that effort should equal reward, one-to-one.
Yeah, we want things to be fair, proportional.
Exactly. We're almost wired for proportionality. But the reality is, balance isn't the default state. Imbalance is. The 80-20 principle isn't some weird exception. It's just reflecting this natural, widespread imbalance. And that's precisely why it can feel so jarring or even unfair when we first encounter it.
Could you give us another example of this, something that really shows how deep this imbalance goes, maybe somewhere we wouldn't normally look?
Sure. Let's look at linguistics. Sir Isaac Pitman, the guy who invented Pitman shorthand. He made this incredible discovery about how we use words. He found that a pretty small group of words, about 700 common ones, actually make up something like 2/3 of everything we say in everyday conversation.
2/3 from just 700 words.
Yeah. And if you include all the variations like plurals or different verb endings, that number jumps to over 80% of our daily chatter.
Wow. So hang on, less than 1% of all the words in the English language accounts for over 80% of what we actually say.
Mind-blowing, isn't it? We use this tiny fraction of our available vocabulary for the vast majority of our communication. It's a massive, mostly unnoticed imbalance right there in how we speak and write.
That really is wild when you stop and think about it. So, okay, these imbalances, language, business, accidents, where do they come from? What drives them?
Often they stem from something scientists call feedback loops. Basically, mechanisms within a system that amplify tiny initial differences over time. They strengthen them.
Feedback loops, like a snowball effect.
Sort of, yeah. Let me give you a really simple example. Imagine you've got a fish tank with a bunch of goldfish, all roughly the same size when you start.
Okay.
You'd probably expect them to grow at about the same rate, right? Stay similar in size.
Yeah, makes sense.
But that's usually not what happens. Over time, even fish that started out almost identical will end up being very different sizes. Some get much bigger than others.
Really? Why? If they started the same?
It's those subtle feedback loops. Maybe one fish is just microscopically bigger, or maybe it's just a tiny bit quicker. That tiny edge lets it grab slightly more food than the others.
Okay.
So it gets more food, it grows a bit faster. Now it's noticeably bigger, which gives it an even bigger advantage at the next feeding time. It gets even more food, grows even faster.
And the gap just widens and widens.
Exactly. It's a positive feedback loop. It keeps amplifying that initial tiny difference until it becomes a huge disparity. The winner keeps winning, essentially.
So it's this compounding effect. A small edge gets magnified over and over, It's not necessarily about being inherently better from the start.
Precisely. And while these imbalances are clearly natural, happening all over the place, when they show up in human society, people often immediately jump to unfair.
Like with money, right? Income inequality.
That's the classic example. When you hear stats like, the top 20% own 80% of the wealth, the immediate reaction is often to label it as social injustice.
Yeah, that happens a lot.
And that feeling of unfairness comes directly from that deep-seated assumption we talked about that things should be 1.1, that work and reward should line up perfectly.
So the 80-20 principle kind of forces us to confront that assumption, to question our intuition about fairness.
It absolutely does. It's not just a business tool. It's a different way of seeing how things actually operate.
Right.
Because it shows really powerfully that not all work brings the same reward. Not all causes have the same effect. Some efforts just have way more leverage than others. Understanding this is so key if you want to use the principle effectively.
How so?
Because it lets you see these imbalances as just, natural patterns, how systems tend to work. Instead of immediately judging them as unfair or morally wrong, it shifts your perspective from judgment to strategy. How can I work with this reality? Where are those high leverage points I can focus on?
Moving from judgment to strategy. I like that. Okay, so we've explored this surprising imbalance and why it feels weird to us. Let's pivot now. Let's get really practical. Actionable stuff. What does this mean for your work, your day-to-day projects, that crazy to-do list? How can we actually use this to get better results?
Right. Well, if we really take on board this idea that okay, roughly 80% of my good results come from just 20% of what I do.
Yeah.
Then the flip side is pretty startling. It means that maybe 80% of our daily work, our routines, our tasks is, to put it bluntly, egregiously inefficient.
Wow. Egregiously inefficient. That hits hard.
It's uncomfortable, right? But think about it. 80% of your grind, the stuff on your list, maybe it's barely making a difference to the outcomes that really matter. It's not just lost time. It's the mental drain, the stress, the missed chances to do something truly impactful.
It feels like spinning your wheels sometimes. Busy work.
Totally. So the key insight here isn't about working harder, definitely not about cramming more in. It's about working smarter. It's about spotting that wastefully spent time and then consciously, maybe even ruthlessly, cutting it out.
Okay, cut out the waste.
And then replace that wasted effort with focused activity from your high-impact 20%. Think about it. Imagine if you could consistently capture that intense, laser-focused energy you get right before a major deadline. You know that feeling.
Oh yeah, that hyper-focus.
If you could bottle that and sustain it, not just for the last few days, but throughout a project or even just your normal workday, that's the kind of power we're talking about. Focusing on your critical 20% turns that temporary burst into how you operate.
Okay, that sounds amazing. The holy grail of productivity. But how? How do we actually find that egregious 80% in our own habits? Where do you even start looking?
You kind of have to become a detective of your own work habits, like an anthropologist studying yourself. Seriously, though, look closely at what you do, hour by hour, day by day. Maybe keep a simple log for a week. Then ask yourself honestly, which parts of my process feel inefficient? What tasks chew up loads of time but don't deliver much? For example, maybe you notice that at the start of a project, you spend ages just thinking, overthinking, second-guessing every little thing, worrying about mistakes before you've even started properly.
Oh, yes. Analysis paralysis, the old friend.
Exactly. That cycle of just ruminating. It's a huge time and energy sink for so many people.
Guilty as charged.
So once you spot your pattern, maybe it's analysis paralysis, maybe it's checking email every 5 minutes, maybe it's getting pulled into low priority stuff, then you can consciously create strategies to break that pattern.
Like setting specific blocks of time for certain tasks or turning off notifications.
Exactly. It's about deliberately redirecting that wasted energy towards the stuff that actually moves the needle, your high-impact 20%. Whatever your personal inefficiencies are, identifying them clearly and then actively changing your process, your environment, maybe even your mindset to avoid them. That's how you unlock that efficiency. It's a deep dive into your own habits to find and amplify the vital few. Now, if we zoom out from the individual and look at the bigger picture, like a business, the 80-20 principle offers some really deep insights there too. And often it challenges the way businesses traditionally operate, especially around profit and maybe surprisingly, simplicity.
That is fascinating. So for a whole company with all its different parts, where would you even start applying 80-20 to get the biggest bang for your buck?
Probably the single most important place to start is optimizing the product range. Businesses often just assume, more products equals more choice, equals more sales, equals more profit.
That sounds logical, right? Offer everything.
It sounds logical, but when you actually run the numbers, analyze which specific products or product groups are really driving the profit, you almost always find a clear 80-20 split.
So you rank them.
Yeah.
But profit margin and sales.
Yeah. And the pattern just jumps out at you. A small number of products are responsible for the vast majority of the profit.
So it's about finding those hidden superstars that might be lost in a giant catalog.
Exactly. They might be overlooked just because there's so much other stuff. Like one of our sources mentions a study at an electronics company.
Okay.
They looked at their huge product list. They found that just 3 of their top products, which only accounted for about 20% of their total sales volume, were actually bringing in over half, 52.6% of their total profit.
Whoa. Over half the profit from just 3 items that weren't even the bulk of sales.
Exactly. That's a massive leverage point, right? Think about the strategic implication.
Yeah, no kidding. That really flips the more is better idea on its head.
Yeah.
So, okay, you find this 80-20 split in your products. What's the next move?
Not strategic. The next step, and this is often the harder one, is to really lean into it. You need to amplify the potential of that profitable 20%. Meaning you prioritize those high-impact products. You focus your company's resources, sales, marketing, R&D, production, on selling way more of them.
Even if it means ignoring other stuff.
Potentially, yeah. At that electronics company, the author actually encouraged them to tell their salespeople, your only goal is to double the sales of these top 3 products. Forget the rest for now, just focus here.
Wow, that's radical. Most companies want sales to push everything, don't they? How do you even sell that idea to the team? Just focus on these 3.
It is radical compared to normal practice, but it works because it channels everyone's energy where it matters most financially. And this laser focus leads to another really big counterintuitive idea from 80-20, the power of simplifying your business, reducing complexity.
Simplify. But aren't big, successful companies usually complex? Don't managers kind of like managing complexity?
Sometimes they do, yeah. And big companies often are complex. But just accepting that complexity isn't always the best path to profit. Most people just assume that being big, having a wide range of products, is automatically better. More products, more customers, more profit.
Yeah, that's the standard thinking. Bigger equals better, more options are good.
But that thinking completely misses the huge, often hidden costs of all that internal complexity.
Hidden costs, like what?
Well, think about it. A massive product range means way more complicated logistics. It means salespeople have to learn and remember hundreds, maybe thousands of different SKUs. Training becomes a nightmare.
Right.
Then there's the admin burden, tracking, invoicing, managing all these tiny volume items. Marketing budgets get fragmented trying to support everything. Decision makers get overloaded. It all adds up.
So these costs just silently eat away at the extra revenue those less popular products bring in.
Often, yes. They can easily outweigh it. It becomes a false economy. You think you're gaining breadth, but you're losing profitability to complexity.
So simplifying is actually cheaper.
Yeah.
More profitable.
It can be, significantly. When you consciously decide to narrow things down, fewer products, maybe fewer core customer types, fewer services, everyone in the company can focus. They can understand the important stuff much more deeply. And that simplification just cascades through the whole organization. Admin gets easier, training is simpler, you get real economies of scale in manufacturing, inventory, marketing, because you're doing more of the same important thing.
Focus creates efficiency. Makes total sense. Are there examples showing this works? Beyond that one electronics company?
Oh, absolutely. There was one study looking at 39 medium-sized companies. It found a really clear pattern. The least complex ones, the ones with narrower product lines, fewer main customers, streamlined suppliers, they were consistently the most successful and the most profitable.
Wow. So less really can be more.
It strongly suggests that. Strategically subtracting complexity can boost profitability more than constantly adding new things.
Okay, it's super clear this isn't just about products then. This 80-20 idea seems incredibly flexible. Where else in a business could you apply to get similar results?
You're absolutely right. It's almost universally applicable. Pretty much any business function can benefit. Take negotiations, for instance.
Negotiations, okay. Those often feel like you have to fight for every single little point, right?
Yeah.
Exhausting.
Exactly. And that's where 80-20 helps. Usually you prepare a list of points you want to achieve, but often the list is way too long and not every point is equally important, not even close.
Right. Some things matter way more than others.
Precisely. An 80/20 analysis would probably show that only a few key points, maybe 20% of your list, are truly critical to your main goal or your bottom line.
So don't sweat the small stuff.
Pretty much. Instead of wasting energy fighting for every minor concession, focus all your effort on winning those crucial 20% of points. Give way on the less important stuff to secure the big wins. Concentrate your firepower.
Prioritize your battles. Conserve energy for what counts. That could really change how people approach negotiating. What about marketing and sales? Huge budgets often go there.
Another perfect application. If the principle holds true, then about 20% of your current customers are likely generating around 80% of your business.
Your best customers.
Your vital few. So your absolute main focus should be identifying who they are and then doing everything you can to keep them happy and loyal.
That sounds so obvious when you say it, but you're right. Companies often seem obsessed with chasing new customers, right? Spending fortunes on acquisition.
It's a very common blind spot. They neglect the gold mine they already have. Once you know who your core 20% are, the mission is to give them just outrageously great customer service.
Not just good, but outrageous.
Yeah. Proactive, personalized, really solving their problems, making them feel incredibly valued. And here's the strategic growth part. When you develop new products or services, don't just throw them out there to everyone. Target them specifically at this existing high-value 20%.
Sell more to the customers you already know, love you, and are profitable.
Exactly. You increase your share of their wallet. It's usually way more efficient and profitable than trying to acquire brand new customers who might be less loyal or cost more to serve.
Deepen the relationships you have. Makes sense. Is there a good example of this working?
Definitely. Think about someone like Nicholas Barsan. He's a top real estate broker in the U.S., earns over $1 million a year in commissions.
Wow.
What's really interesting is that over a third of that income comes directly from repeat customers, people he's worked with before who come back or who send him referrals.
So he's built a business on loyalty from a core group.
Precisely. It shows how profitable it is to focus intensely on client happiness. He's not just chasing the next deal, he's cultivating relationships that pay off again and again. It's 80/20 applied to customer relations, proving that nurturing that vital minority can drive the majority of your success, really in any function.
Okay, this all sounds incredibly useful for business, for work productivity, but shifting gears.
Yeah.
Applying this kind of formal, data-heavy 80/20 analysis to our personal lives, friendships, happiness, that feels harder.
Right.
We don't usually have spreadsheets on how much joy a friend brings us.
That's a really important point. And yeah, it's a common question. How do you apply this when you don't have hard numbers, when you can't run stats on your emotions?
Exactly.
This is where we move from strict analysis to what you might call 80/20 thinking. It's more about estimation, conscious awareness, intuitive prioritizing, not precise measurement.
80/20 thinking. Okay.
See, conventional thinking often just assumes everything's equal.
Right.
Like, maybe we're taught all our friends are equally valuable.
Which is a nice idea, but maybe not always true in practice.
Right. Life isn't usually like that. Some relationships are just deeper, more meaningful, more central to our well-being. 80/20 thinking acknowledges that reality. Not every relationship, not every activity gives you the same value or impact. Some friends are naturally more important to you. The connection is stronger, more supportive. You could probably estimate, reasonably, that about 20% of your friendships generate maybe 80% of the real value, the deep joy, the support, the camaraderie you get.
So it's not about coldly ranking people.
Definitely not.
But more about intuitively recognizing where your energy feels best spent, where you get the most positive return emotionally.
Exactly. It's about self-awareness within your social world.
Yeah.
The difference between formal analysis and this 80/20 thinking is analysis needs data, numbers. Thinking just needs you to make an honest, informed estimate based on your own feelings and experience.
Yep.
You can't put a number on relationship value, but you can ask yourself some really revealing questions like, honestly, who are the most important people in my life? Who consistently lifts me up? Who brings me real joy?
And then the kicker.
How much real quality time am I actually spending with them each week?
Oof. Yeah, that kind of internal audit can be
Yeah.
revealing. Maybe a bit uncomfortable, but definitely useful.
It really can be. It helps you quickly see which relationships are your vital few. And 80/20 thinking would strongly suggest you aim for quality over quantity.
Deepen those key connections.
Exactly. Focus on nurturing that most valuable 20%. Invest more time and energy there, rather than spreading yourself thin across tons of surface-level connections that don't really feed your soul. And you can apply this intuitive approach to lots of personal areas just by tuning into your own experience. No spreadsheets required.
Okay, let's talk about time. We hear constantly about time management's a huge industry. But how does 80/20 offer maybe a better, maybe even revolutionary way to get efficient and, crucially, avoid just packing our schedules tighter and tighter until we break?
That's a great angle, because traditional time management, while it has its place, it can boost productivity, maybe 15–25%, it often creates its own problems, leading to burnout.
How so?
Well, the usual approach is list tasks, prioritize them, schedule them.
Right.
But the big flaw is most people aren't actually sure which tasks are truly the most important, the highest leverage ones.
So they end up marking almost everything as urgent or high priority.
Exactly. You see people with to-do lists where like 60 or 70% of items are marked high priority, which, as you said earlier, means nothing is really prioritized.
This leads to feeling overwhelmed.
Totally. Jam-packed schedules, feeling like you're always behind, working longer hours. It's a recipe for stress and burnout. Just trying to cram more into an already full schedule isn't sustainable.
So what's the 80/20 alternative? The time revolution.
It's a different approach. First, you put your energy into clearly identifying that 20% of your tasks that actually produce 80% of your results, your achievements, your impact.
Finding the vital few tasks.
Yes. And then you focus intensely, almost single-mindedly on those tasks. You give them your best energy, and you consciously let other, less important things fall away, or you delegate them, or you just accept they won't get done right now.
That feels like a fundamental shift. Not, how can I do more? But what's the most important thing to do, and how can I do that really well? Quality over quantity of effort again.
Precisely. Let me share an example from the author's consulting days. They noticed their firm was consistently getting better results for clients than competitors, but their consultants weren't working longer hours or noticeably harder.
Interesting. How?
Well, most consulting firms try to address a huge range of client issues, right? They deliver these big reports, lots of analysis, but then they often leave the client to figure out how to actually implement all the recommendations.
Yeah, the client gets the homework assignment.
Right, and it can be overwhelming. In contrast, the author's colleagues used an 80/20 approach. They focused intensely on only the most critical 20% of the client's problems, the issues that would create the most value if solved.
Okay, narrow the focus.
And crucially, because they weren't trying to boil the ocean, they used the time they saved to actively help the client implement the solutions for those core problems.
So they helped with the follow-through on the most important stuff.
Exactly. And that approach apparently helped them blow past other firms in terms of delivering actual results, increasing client profits. This time revolution idea lets you free up time and mental energy without sacrificing impact. It proves you can achieve more by being selective about where you apply your effort. Don't just keep adding to the list.
This feels like it goes even deeper. This principle, applied well, could genuinely impact our overall happiness, right? Our quality of life.
Absolutely. And maybe this is the most liberating application of all. If you ask most people what defines quality of life, they'll probably say happiness.
Yeah, fundamentally.
But interestingly, very few of us actively, systematically try to change our lives to be happier. It's strange. In fact, lots of people spend huge chunks of their time doing things that make them actively miserable.
Like?
Well, think about jobs. So many people are stuck in jobs they really don't enjoy. You know, maybe sitting in an office, doing tasks that feel meaningless, just watching the clock, waiting for the day or the week to end, dreaming of Friday or their next vacation.
That's a pretty bleak picture, but yeah, it's definitely relatable for a lot of folks. We kind of just accept it. Assume that's how adulting works. A baseline level of unhappiness is normal.
And that's exactly the assumption 80/20 thinking encourages you to challenge. Fundamentally question it.
So how do you remedy that if you feel stuck?
It starts, simply enough, by trying to consciously identify where your happiness and unhappiness actually come from in your life. Don't just live with a vague feeling. Ask yourself, okay, which 20% of my time, my activities, my relationships brings me 80% of my joy and satisfaction?
Finding the joy spot.
Yeah, and then the flip side, which 20% of my life creates 80% of my unhappiness, my stress, my frustration. Once you have a clearer picture of that 80% of your life that generates very little happiness, that just drains you. The next step is to take action. Systematically decrease the time and energy you give to those things.
So let's take the job example. If your job is the main source of misery, you don't just have to suck it up.
Absolutely not. That's the whole point. If your job or big parts of it consistently makes you unhappy, you should actively look for ways to change that.
Like what? Quitting tomorrow isn't always an option.
No, of course not. It's about strategic change. It could mean seriously looking for other jobs that might be a better fit for your skills and passions. Or maybe exploring ways to reshape your current job. Can you focus more on tasks you enjoy and delegate or minimize the ones you hate? Could you even negotiate reduced hours to create more space for things that bring you joy?
So it's about taking control, not resigning yourself to unhappiness.
Exactly. The crucial message is, don't just accept working a job or living a life that makes you miserable day after day. It's not about impulsive, drastic moves necessarily, but about making conscious, intentional shifts over time towards more happiness.
And what happens when you start cutting down on those unhappiness drivers? What fills the space?
That's the beautiful part. When you manage to consciously trim away the things that drag you down, you suddenly find you have more time, more energy, more mental bandwidth for the things that do make you happy, the things that energize and fulfill you.
So if you cut back work hours, maybe you spend more time with family or on a hobby.
Precisely. You have more resources to invest in your joy-generating 20%. It's about deliberately curating your life for more fulfillment, a higher quality of existence. Just think, what 20% of your life gives you 80% of your happiness? And then intentionally find ways to do more of that. Your life will undoubtedly be happier if you commit to that process.
Okay, so let's try and wrap this up. We've gone pretty deep into this powerful idea. The 80-20 principle basically shows us again and again that in almost everything, business, life, happiness, a small fraction of the input, maybe 20%, creates a huge chunk of the output, like 80%.
Yeah, it's this universal pattern of imbalance. It's just woven into how things work.
And really mind-blowing, kind of liberating part is realizing that maybe 80% of our effort is often spent.
Yeah.
Well, inefficiently, on stuff that doesn't really make a big difference.
Right.
But, and this is the hopeful part, if you can figure out how to consciously, strategically shift your focus onto that vital 20%, you get this massive boost in efficiency, in success, and maybe even just feeling happier and more fulfilled. It's really about working smarter, understanding where your true leverage is.
That sums it up perfectly. It's simple on the surface, but the implications are huge and freeing. And it applies everywhere, optimizing a business, enriching your friendships, improving your quality of life.
Yeah.
So the practical advice boils down to things like, focus your business on the most profitable products and customers. And in your personal life, apply that 80-20 thinking to your time, your relationships, your pursuit of happiness. Make conscious choices to maximize impact and joy.
So here's a final thought for you. Listen right now. What if you applied this 80-20 idea not just to tasks or products, but to your decisions? Think about it. What critical 20% of choices that you make in your life truly shape, say, 80% of your long-term outcomes, your path, your ultimate destination?
That's a big question.
It is. And how might really understanding that change what you choose to focus on, what you prioritize, what you decide to say no to, starting today?
It really invites some deep reflection, doesn't it, on what truly matters. We hope you'll take some time to think about where you can start applying this powerful principle in your own life to achieve more, waste less effort, and find greater satisfaction along the way.